My name is Eric Rainville. I'm a UX architect with Esri. Been with Esri about 4 years. I work with the apps group on the software side. So I work on, my group works on workforce, collector, navigator, survey, that group of apps. This is my coworker Kyle. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Kyle Jones. I'm also a UX architect. I'm on the web strategy team at Esri, which basically means I work on Esri.com and some of the other kinds of marketing side of Esri, as well as some of the other kind of online kind of web-based systems and experiences we have. I've been here about a year and a half.
Wow,
just I know.
It seems like it's been forever.
Second Dev Summit, so it's always really fun.
Nice.
So, thanks.
Who's first Dev Summit? Nice, all right. Second? Third? More than 3? Yeah, there we go. So I think this is my 4th, so welcome. So this is a quote that I found on Twitter some years ago that really struck home with me. I've written it down on a note, and every job, every cube that I move to, it's the first thing that goes with me and gets pinned up on the wall. But definitely something that I try and keep in mind as I work on designs, on features, and how I'm going to implement them, thinking about how the user is going to use them. And putting myself in that shoes, if I was using some software and found a workaround or found a way to use something difficult, and then all of a sudden later the designers or developers like, hey, we changed this whole thing around, I'm going to be a little more upset that they just changed something that I've gotten so used to in my workflow. So we use user research to try and make sure that we get this right the first time so that we're not breaking stuff on you later on down the road. Not saying it never happens, but we try and avoid it. So who's done any form of user research? Any user testing too? Okay. Who is like here because they really want to do this, learn how to incorporate it into your test? Good answer. It was a trick question. So who just needs like me to be quiet so you can get a little nap in the background? All right, me. Thanks, Kyle. So why do we do research? No matter what we design, no matter what we program stuff, the people who use it are unpredictable. They're going to use your software in ways that you did not design or intend to use. They will surprise you about what they're doing. I've had users come back and ask like, hey, when I do such and such with your app, and the first thing I go is like, I didn't even know it could do that. I'm like, what are you, like, show me what you're doing first. And like, so that's always a shocker. Your users, especially for us, for Esri, our users come from so many backgrounds, so many experiences, so many, from government to nonprofits to commercial to, the same people that are using our software to install and track pipelines are using it to measure glacier melt or using it to just getting their to-do list for what they need to do today for on the field. So it's hard to cover for all those kind of things, so just user testing helps us validate our designs and ideas. We're continually trying to improve the process, improve the designs. We'll come up with stuff that's like, well, we think this will work. No way to tell unless you put it into some user's hands and test it. And finally, in the end, build a better product. So there's 4 basic pieces that we're going to go over today that are the building blocks for any kind of testing. So no matter if you're trying to do testing in a lab with recording, or I like to do a little bit more in the field testing. So I'll go and ride with the workers in the trucks that are using collector on an iPad and just watch them and see how they're doing it. But any kind of whatever format your testing takes place, they all have some form of these 4 building blocks that we're going to go over. The first one is defining your objectives. What is it you want to build? What is it when you test? What questions do you have about your design? From there, we got scenarios and tasks. So those are the pieces that we're actually going to use in our test. We're going to ask people to put yourself in their shoes. Can you do this with this product or application? a little bit about how do you facilitate a test. If you have observers that are helping you take notes and things, what are their responsibilities? And last, summarizing your results and presenting them to your stakeholders, and a few tips on that. So, little moment for any Silicon Valley fans. Yeah? No? Really? One in the back? All right. Little clip here that that really hits home on user testing. That'll play.
It's going great. They've been engaging with the platform for about an hour now. They're just starting the Q&A.
Oh, great. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your feelings on the revolutionary new Pied Piper platform. Now, Bernice, you say here that you were totally freaked out by the platform. What specifically totally freaked you out?
Everything. Just every single thing about it. Just like how it worked.
Now, who else found themselves totally freaked out by this platform? Barry, Warren, Natalie, Martina, Gwen, Amy, Walker, and Clay. You were all totally freaked out. Was anyone not totally freaked out? Clark? Good. What was your reaction?
It just made me feel stupid.
This file sync thing is confusing. When I put videos into my main folder, it says it uploaded them, but then I
Didn't see where they went. It said stuff was on my phone and my iPad, and when I looked at the memory, it said 0K used. So stuff wasn't on there.
That's the platform. He's describing the platform and what's great about it. Well, clearly he doesn't get it. Clearly none of these people get it. Maybe this is a bad group.
This is the 5th one today, and it's the least hostile reaction you've seen.
Okay, well, everyone that I showed the beta to loved it. Loved.
Oh, shit.
What?
Who did you give the beta to? Your friends? Engineers?
Well, yeah, Monica, I wanted to give it to people who would understand what I'm trying to do so I could get useful feedback. And with all due respect, I give it to you, the one person without a computing background, and you said it felt engineered. Oh, shit.
Yeah, you're trying to sell the platform to regular people, but you never actually put it in the hands of regular people. Like them.
So when I was binge watching this show, I saw that, I'm like, oh my God, that is just so too close to home. But it happens. It definitely happens where, we design something, we'll think about it, it works perfectly, works on my machine, and then when we finally put it in someone's hands that's not a designer, that's not a developer, particularly for the apps that I work on that's not a GIS analyst, and I ask them to do GIS work, and then it's like, oh, wow, we kind of assumed a lot about what they would know. So it definitely happens. So we're going to define the first part here, we're going to define our objectives. So the objectives form the basis of your test plan. It's really a way to write down for yourself, for your stakeholders, any open questions you have about a design. We'll take a particular feature or particular screen. It's usually not the entire application. That's a lot to test. But if there's particular questions that you have, if in the design or your stakeholders have, their concerns. So I've really pushed for a particular feature or design on a feature before where my product owners have said, okay, I'm not really sure about this, but you're the designer, so test it, prove me wrong. And sometimes it'll come back and we'll test it and okay, yes, people got it, or you know what? People didn't get it. You were right, I was wrong, we'll go with your way, but at least we didn't get it into the product and then find that out. So the objectives is a nice way to keep everybody on the same page when you're going into the test of what you're going to try and accomplish here. So I've got this quick example of a running shoe site. And this one, in this design maybe, the designers have added a nice little sliding feature for filtering by price up there. It seems like it's easy to use. People should get it, right? But I don't really see that on a lot of e-commerce sites. So we could go into a test and say, let's particularly look at that feature. So we might have some open questions, like, do shoppers understand how to navigate through the categories? How will they find shoes within a given price range? Because on this, they can see the prices there, they can use the filter, or they can have, from the drop down, they can sort everything by price too. So there's 3 different ways to find out things by price on this. So we're curious, is it worth building this into the product? Excuse me. So we'll have, so the areas of concerns are the favorite, again, also the favorites list. So the favorites, nice little heart icon, everybody knows what that is, but it's pretty subtle on this site. So we're also wondering if we should add that too, or if we should address it a little bit different visually. So then, of course, the area of interest is will shoppers use the range slider? So this is where we kind of do a little bit of interactivity. I've got this site that I use quite a bit, motorcycle rider. Any other motorcycle riders? No? Nobody? One? All right. So this is a site that I spend way too much money on, more than my wife knows, hopefully. This is not going to be on broadcast, right? Everybody's keeping it a secret. But they added a new feature when they redesigned their site a couple years ago for a garage. So I can add my particular motorcycle, year, make, and model to that. And then when I search for parts, it automatically figures out this fits your motorcycle. Really neat. So if we wanted to go and user test this before it launched, anybody think of any questions that you would want to ask around, this feature before you tested it? Anyone? Yes. Can you add multiple vehicles? Yes. So it wasn't obvious that I can have more than one motorcycle. People tend to have more than one motorcycle. Any others? So maybe what if I have multiple ones? How do I shop for parts for a particular one? Is it going to show me everything that fits both of mine, or can I sort them out? How do I trust that what they're showing me actually does fit? Maybe there's some particular about my bike. Maybe I've customized mine and I know that some parts no longer fit mine. So these are some questions that we can have, that we can test, and put out there for users to kind of work through. So I had some examples here. Let me see. So yeah, so an example would be, do users understand how to add and remove motorcycles to your garage? Do the parts that we recommend actually fit? Some concerns might be finding parts that are not for your motorcycle. So if I need to order something for mine, but a buddy asked me, hey, when you put that order, can you get an oil filter and stuff for mine too? Like, okay, so now how do I jump out of this sorting that everything's for me and say, okay, now I just want to see everything? And will shoppers actually go through the trouble of adding their motorcycle to this site? It's a really cool feature, but how many steps is it? Will they actually bother to do it? Will they save it? Will they come back? So once we have our overview, our goals of what we want to test, we need to write some scenarios and tasks that we're actually going to use for tests. So our scenarios are the stories and the content that we're going to build. We're going to write it up. We're going to specify some goals and questions that need to be answered by the participant. They define who the user is, what they're trying to do, why. So when you actually participate in the test, some of you might have participated in some that we're doing here this week. We'll ask you so you're a GIS manager for a local town, and you need to provide data for such and such. You may not be that person, but you can kind of feel that role. And the biggest trick to writing good scenarios and tests or tasks for this is to not give away the answers. So in that previous example of when we want to test the favorites list, but I don't want to use the word favorites if it's in the interface, because they'll just oh, I found that, I've matched it up, I've answered the question. So it seems like they're easy, and the examples are pretty straightforward, but actually when you get into writing them, they can be a little tricky. So back to our running shoe site, this might be a good example of a scenario. So you're a runner looking to buy a new pair of shoes. You need to buy a pair that are light and within your budget. So there is a category called lightweight shoes, but I don't want to use the word lightweight, so I kind of hinted at what you want to look for in that. So in here, the key points as a runner, so I've identified who this person is that you want to relate to, what they're trying to do. We're trying to buy a new pair of shoes. And then some hints that that will guide you through the features, or hopefully point you to the features that I want you to try and use. So light shoes, so you're going to hopefully use the category filtering to see if you can drill down through there. And the budget, that's what's going to drive me to which price range sort are they going to use. Any questions so far? No? Anyone? Okay, so from that scenario, we're going to have some tasks. So the tasks are going to support that scenario, state what the user wants to do. Again, do not try and include any information of how to complete that. It's kind of a tricky bit of writing there too. And the tasks are the pieces of the test that will let your user show you how they're going to use your site. So this is where you're going to really find out whether you did something right or wrong, whether they're going to use it where you had no idea, not what you intended, but they're going to try and accomplish the goal to fit the test. So back to this example. So a scenario for this, we went over before, you're a runner looking to buy a new pair of shoes. So the first task we'll ask the participant to do is find light shoes that fit for under $100. So that hits those various parts of the interface, various parts of the app that we want them to use. And the second one is once you've found those 5, 10 pairs that fit that category, save 2 to your favorites. How would you save 2 to come back to? So this will tell us, do they notice the feature to add them to the favorites list? And this could be a complete test right here, and takes 10 minutes maybe for someone to run through, and you'll learn quite a bit from such a simple test. So back to my favorite example of this site. So scenarios and tests that we might run right for this. So you've recently purchased a second motorcycle, hinting on how do you add multiple ones. It's a used one. So we're going to give them some information, even if they're not a motorcycle rider, you own a car, you own something else that you can relate to this. So we'll say, okay, here's the year, make, and model to add to this. And we're going to set up the story as you're preparing to go on a road trip. So since it's a used motorcycle, you're going to need a few things to get ready for this road trip. So first task is, can you add this to the garage? And the second task is, find a set of tires. We give them a little bit of criteria. They need to be good on and off road, so can they dive into the information of the product and discern that? And do they fit your motorcycle? So when the results come up, do they feel confident that the match is good for whatever the model that they've added into it? Another quick water break for me, a little entertainment here. So this is it playing? Nope, come on. So for those of you who have not watched this series, the gentleman here, they're doing another user test for the new Huli phone, and they're supposed to be the evil Google in this show. So they're testing out their new phone software for the first time with some users.
Ladies and gentlemen, minutes you've had an opportunity to explore a standard Huli phone upgraded with a brand new operating system called Nucleus. Thank you all for being here. Alan, Lisa, Josh, Yana, Katie, Ramon. Now I'd like to get everyone's first impressions. Who'd like to jump in? Anyone? How about you, Ramon?
It's just stupid.
Okay, so Ramon feels the phone is stupid. Could you elaborate, Ramon? Stupid how? Please, be as specific as possible, Ramon.
Well, it's slow. The apps keep quitting on me. I tried to watch a movie, and it kept freezing up. And when I'm typing, like, there's a delay. Then all the letters pop up at once. You took a good phone and you made it all, like, shitty.
Keep in mind, I didn't design the phone.
It pissed me off.
I appreciate your honesty, Ramon.
That's just one guy's opinion.
Who else feels this product is stupid? Alan, Lisa, Josh, Yana, Katie. And did it piss off anyone else? Alan, Lisa, Josh, Yana, Katie.
Christina, how bad is this? Be honest. Is this Windows Vista bad? It's not iPhone 4 bad, is it? Fuck. Don't tell me this is Zoom bad.
I'm sorry, Gavin. It's Apple Maps bad.
And who else felt this product is messed up? Alan, Lisa, Josh, Yana. Sorry for the disturbance, Alan, Lisa, Josh, Yana.
There's nothing more humbling than watching someone test your app and it fails. Yeah, especially when you thought, like, oh, it's going to be great. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kyle here.
So that's leading up to actually carrying out the usability study and talking to the people that you're trying to get feedback from. And conducting the session itself has, there's a few things you want to keep in mind. So, actually, could you hand me my laptop? Thanks. Sorry about that. So, kind of like you saw in that video, the testing session, these can be done kind of in like a kind of lab setting, like in your office, or sometimes you can like rent spaces to go do these things, or you can also do them out where your users are using your stuff, kind of in their homes, in their offices, or maybe you're trying to approach people in like a coffee shop just to try to talk to them. But either way, it's kind of a weird situation. It's a little bit contrived. And so for that reason, you really want to kind of make people at ease and try to set it up in a way that it's a little bit more comfortable for people. So the first thing you want to do when you're kind of talking to someone or when you're starting the study is, making sure that, you are kind of greeting them. It's kind of just being kind of personable and kind of making a relaxing kind of atmosphere. And another thing you want to keep in mind is that, especially if you're doing any kind of recording, like if you're recording the screen or recording their audio or a video or something like that, which is really helpful in trying to understand like where people are, what they're thinking and where they mess up. But that's really important that they know that you're doing that, right? So be able to get informed consent and have them sign off on that, and let them know too how you're going to use that, right? So one of the things that we say is, we have this, some software that records the screen and the webcam that records your audio and video of you. And this is used by our team so that we can, take notes and make sure that we're kind of analyzing this the right way. And then if they're working with something that hasn't been released yet, it's also a good idea to have them sign an NDA as well. And before the actual kind of scenarios and tests start, sometimes it can be really helpful too to kind of as a bit of an icebreaker, but also as a way to kind of better contextualize, some of the ways that people are using your interface. Is just to ask them a few kind of questions, kind of open-ended interview-style questions. So something that's a good icebreaker is just kind of tell me a little bit about what you do, or what's a kind of typical day like at the office or at home for you. Depending on what it is you're testing. Asking something kind of real general that everyone can know the answer to. And then you can kind of follow up with maybe some specific questions. Like if you're trying to test this kind of e-commerce style site, maybe you could ask, how often do you buy stuff online? Where do you typically buy things from? And this is really helpful to understand some of their points of reference, so that when they get confused by something in your interface, you can kind of think back or kind of circle back and say, oh, so is that how would you have expected that to perform? And then they may give you some kind of compared to Amazon or compared to wherever that helps you understand what those expectations they have, where those are coming from. Another key thing is to remind them to think out loud. So because we can't be inside people's heads, we have to really understand kind of what they're thinking. And again, this is kind of not something you do every day, typically, but it's also really helpful. So if you're recording the screen and you're kind of listening to them and taking notes and things like that, you can really try to better understand like what they're kind of looking for, what they're thinking. And again, you can always, if people start to get really focused, you can just say, oh, what are you looking for? What are you thinking about? Just to kind of remind them and kind of keep that out there. Another way to help kind of ease this transition is to ask them to read the scenarios and tasks out loud. So that way they get kind of used to talking out loud, and then they can, if it becomes really clear if they're not really understanding the tasks or the scenarios, then you can kind of rephrase it and things like that. So there's kind of two main roles in this session. Sometimes these are kind of collapsed if you're just trying to do something kind of quick and dirty. You don't have a lot of time or bandwidth. You can do both facilitate the study as well as be the note taker. But ideally, it's really helpful to have at least two people. So one person that's running the study, sitting there with the person, and then someone else that's watching and observing. It takes a lot of focus and attention to kind of lead and facilitate the study, which doesn't allow you to free up your time to kind of reflect quickly and capture like, okay, first they went straight to this option, then they skipped over the thing that was correct that we wanted them to do, and then they went down below it, and it's really hard to keep track of the detail sometimes while you're actually like coaching them through it and trying to get them to think out loud and those kinds of things. Something else is to be considerate of the time, right? So depending, like Eric was saying, you can have something that's just a couple quick tasks, and even sometimes these can be done unmoderated. So there's a lot of tools and services out there that you can, put the link to your app or website in there, and then write a few tasks, and then it sends it out to like 10,000 people, and then you get a bunch of responses back. So a study can be as quick as that, as a few minutes, but then it could take upwards of 30 or 40 minutes if it's a really complex piece of software or something like that, or there's a bunch of things you're trying to test. But about 45 minutes is kind of the upper limit. Otherwise, people start getting kind of fatigued. The focus and energy kind of starts to drain a little bit, and not to mention you're kind of taking a lot of their time out of their day, whether that's during their work day or at a conference like this. Trying to be considerate of how long your test is and how long that might take them is something that's important as well, and to let them know that ahead of time. So after the session happens and they do the tasks and run through the scenarios, it's also helpful as a kind of cool down to have some kind of another set of open-ended questions. And again, there's going to be some basic ones that gives them a chance to think back. So for example, what was the thing you liked best about this website or about this app? Where did it seem like you had the most difficulty or frustration? What do you think might be a way to change or alleviate those frustrations? Or what would you like to see improved about this? Some of this stuff has already come up, or will have come up already as they work through the tasks, and they're talking out loud and kind of letting you know what they think. But asking it again kind of sometimes they'll repeat something usually at first, and then they'll kind of go off on a tangent and dig a little bit deeper and maybe get into a deeper reason why that bothered them or why that was really frustrating. So again, when you're in the midst of all the tasks and things, you don't always want to try to dig into those kinds of more in-depth explanations. You want to kind of try to keep it focused. So having these questions at the end allows you to kind of dig a little bit deeper. And then that's kind of the end of the session. You just be sure to thank them for their time. Always try to have some kind of incentive, whether that's a gift card or like a T-shirt or anything, like something small, or not necessarily something small, but something that kind of fits the time, and especially the it's kind of what that person might expect, right? So if you're trying to test with doctors or professionals, you may, sometimes I've heard incentives being $200 an hour, for example, for some in-depth, like in the field kind of usability testing. So you want to make sure that that incentive is kind of balanced and seems like it's reasonable for the effort and time it took, and being, again, taking into consideration what that person's time is worth. And then be sure, if you're doing this again, make sure that you kind of reset all the materials, turn the prototype, put it back on the main page, or clear the cache or something like that. Just kind of, have a little kind of checklist of things that you want to sure to have all reset that are ready to go for the next person.
I'm tempted to hit on you. Sorry.
So as the facilitator, it's really important to try to just be relaxed. It's like I said, it's kind of a contrived situation. How did that, in that Silicon Valley clip, how did that room feel? Not the room that they were observing in, but the room that all the people were kind of sitting in. What did that seem like? What did that feel like to you all? What did you say? Awkward? Tense? Okay. So those are some things you want to avoid. Again, the group settings are kind of weird. The focus groups don't always kind of work for these kinds of things. One-on-one is much better, and it's less awkward, less kind of pressure from the other people in the room. And again, it helps to rehearse too. Even though if you've done a bunch of these studies, every study is a little bit different. So that's something I forgot to mention on the previous slide, is try to rehearse this with like a coworker or just a friend or family member or something. Just like, hey, can you help me out real quick? I want to run through this. That helps you kind of calms your nerves a little bit, but it helps you, again, you can estimate the time better, figure out, okay, the wording on this task is confusing, I didn't catch that. And again, it just kind of helps make things go a little bit smoother. And in terms of the space where you're doing the study, if you're doing this in your own kind of office area, try not to make it feel like super sterile or cluttered or busy. You want to try to limit the distractions, but at the same time, just try to make it feel comfortable. Kind of a white-walled room with nothing but a computer is a little weird, a little laboratory-like. So try to pick a place that just feels comfortable. So by that same token, something else that's really helpful is to remind them that they're not being the ones being tested. So what you're doing is, what you're testing in usability is the design. It's the prototype, the app, the interface. You're not testing them, so they can't make any mistakes. So that's like the key thing that they want to be able to have in their minds, and again, kind of set them at ease and let them kind of relax a bit more and just feel free to just buzz through those tasks and see where people go. Keeping track of time. So again, this is being considerate of how long this is taking. If it seems like someone gets, inevitably, someone might get stuck on a task that someone else just whizzes right through. So always just trying to keep track of the time, but don't try to rush them. You don't want to rush them. But if it seems like they're kind of going down a rabbit hole or not getting something, just say, great, that's really helpful. Let's go on to the next task. So some easy ways is to try to keep it moving, keep your eye on the clock, but then also it seems like if they could also be getting quite frustrated with something. So that kind of gives them a chance to kind of shift gears in their focus a little bit. As the facilitator, you still need to pay attention, whether or not you're taking some quick kind of jottings or notes. But you really want to kind of pay more attention to kind of watch the screen as well while you're listening to them. So this is something that comes up a lot in usability research is how do you balance what people say versus what people do? Because sometimes, especially when they go back and kind of reflect on something, they'll be like, oh, I would never use something like this, or I would have never figured this out. Well, a second ago, you just did it without thinking right after reading the task. So you always want to try to watch the screen, but also try to pay attention to what they're saying as well. So that way you can kind of later on, once you're kind of looking at the results, you can kind of have a better idea of what that was like when they were doing that. And again, if you have a recording, that helps to kind of review some of those kinds of tricky things like that. You can also look for things like, okay, they were trying to click this, but that thing wasn't a link. Or they hovered over this. Why were they hovering over this? But they were kind of, seems like they were focused over here, but they still hovered over this image. You could follow up with, what were you expecting to happen? I saw that you were, kind of hovering over there. What were you looking for? And then, kind of again, asking, don't be afraid to ask some of these kind of follow-up questions. So if the task is to find a pair of shoes that are that don't weigh very much or that fit your budget, and they're kind of searching around, they may end up in a totally different place. And it's like, okay, try to get this back on track, because sometimes you still want to get, that's great to see where they went. They went somewhere you didn't expect, but at the same time, you still need to get feedback on the thing that you just built. So you could, there's a few different ways you can do that. You can say, okay, that's great. Let's head back to that page. Where else might you have found this? Or what were you looking for when you went on this page? So don't be afraid to try to ask some of those kinds of follow-up questions to help better understand what they were doing. So as the observer, it seems like, oh, thank you. The observer, it sounds simple, right? You just have to, take notes, listen to what they're saying, write down what they do, right? Well, kinda. There's a lot of things that you can take away. So since you're not focused on making sure that people understand the tasks and scenarios and kind of seeing kind of in the moment how they're using the software and the interface, the observer is really freed up to really capture those things for the group to kind of go back and look at and to see how people did, what did they do. Some things to watch if you're using a kind of a webcam or camera that has their face is really valuable. Those facial expressions, when people scrunch they kind of like, we all do it. It's unconscious, and so that's what you're really looking for. When people, those different facial expressions, someone's eyes get big, they do something really cool happens, or they start to like furrow their brow, or they frown. Those things are really helpful to help contextualize, again, kind of balancing what they're saying, what they're doing, and then how they're kind of acting and behaving. Helps you just really get a sense of if something was really messed up, or, oh, well, it seemed they got through it all right, but it seemed a little confusing. Helps you kind of understand some of that severity. The language is really important as well. And this is something that can inform a lot of different things. So it is oftentimes really good for follow-up questions. So someone might be confused by the wording of a headline or a button or the name of a menu or something like that. And just because the wording didn't align with what they thought it was, they may not even click it. They may not go there, may think it's something totally irrelevant to what the task was trying to have them do. So that's helpful to kind of go back and say, okay, it seems like that word was confusing. How would you describe what's inside there? And that allows them to kind of invites them to kind of open up and tell them how they would have categorized that, how they would have grouped that, how they would have named that, which is really helpful. Whether or not you take those exact words and put them in the interface, that's always something you discuss kind of when you're analyzing and going back through this stuff with the team. But at least it helps you see some of those mental models that people have. So you start to get a sense of the kind of groupings that people have in their heads and how well your software kind of aligns with that. And again, tone of voice as well as their facial expressions can tell you a lot about how they are, how they feel about this thing, right? Because impressions and how people feel about the interface itself has a lot of impact on if and when and how they use it, right? So you can really tell when people get excited, when they get passionate, when they're getting really flustered or frustrated, or like we saw in the thing that makes them feel stupid. All of this is a gold mine. And you never know. That's one of the great things about some of the about the usability testing is that you get a lot of results. You get way more than what you think you will, which is a blessing and a curse. Thanks. So you have audio recording, you have a video recording, right? That has both the audio and you have the webcam of their face as well as what they're saying. Then you have a recording of the screen. You have your notes from maybe yourself and a few other people. That's a lot of data. That's a lot of qualitative data to sift through. And again, depending on what the objectives were and what your kind of bandwidth is and time and that you're able to devote to this, there's a lot of different ways that you can go about analyzing the results and summarizing them. If it's a really quick test and you just have 2 tasks, that's pretty straightforward. You can get through that pretty quickly, especially if it's very targeted on certain features or interactions. Or if it's a little bit more open-ended, you're testing a rough kind of wireframe prototype, you maybe want to try to spend a little bit more time and really dig into what that is to help guide further design and development and some of those priorities and features and things like that. It's really important to discuss this as a team. It's really interesting to see 4 people observing a study and how all the different things that they see. Especially, again, it's really hard to catch lots of those things as you're facilitating it in real time, but for the observers, like having 2 to 3 observers is really helpful. Even if 1 is great to help kind of spread the work around a little bit, but 2 or 3 is fantastic. Allows you to take away a lot of different perspectives. And then it's really important to discuss those things while it's still fresh in everyone's heads. Sometimes it's oftentimes good to build in a chunk of 15, 20 minutes or so after each session. So that way the facilitator comes and you guys can have a quick chat and that's a quick way to start synthesizing some of the stuff you're seeing and maybe things that you need to tweak already or keep an eye on in the subsequent sessions and things like that. That said, you don't want to see the first session and jump straight into like fixing things. Pump the brakes a little bit. It's like as soon as you start seeing the people reacting and using stuff, it's like, oh man, there's like 20 ways we can fix this. This is great. This is awesome. Let's go do it. Whiteboard right now. That's great. Hold on. Like keep those ideas, but just write them down and sit on them until all the people kind of get through, and you can kind of balance all the different results you get. Comparing notes, really helpful. Yeah, again, like I said, not everyone sees the same thing. And sometimes you need to go back to the video and go back to the video and say, okay, half of us said the person did this, half of us said the person did something else. What happened in the video? And then sometimes that's the way to help clarify some of those things. And as you go through it, you'll start seeing patterns. You'll start seeing where people tripped up, the words that seemed confusing, and even you get feedback on the design of the scenarios and tasks themselves. Sometimes the scenario is kind of vague, or there's too much detail in it, and people seem to getting distracted on some word that you put in there that is kind of leading them astray. They're kind of hunting and pecking for the specific thing that they saw and hear. So sometimes it allows you to improve the way that you write scenarios and tasks in the future as well as you start to go through these. And again, like there's a lot of different ways you can do this. There's more and more like products and apps out there that are for kind of user research analysis tools, different ways that you can tag and categorize things. And if you have any questions or recommendations on that, feel free to share them. But then what's really important is what do you do with the findings? And again, there's a lot of, depending on the scope of the study that you're doing and how big your team is and what you're testing, this can be as quick as, hey, here's the top 5 things that seemed like they were issues. Let's take this to the project manager and talk this through in our next meeting and work on prioritizing these things. Or maybe the thing you're testing, this happens to me all the time working on Esri.com. It's like, we're testing this new design for this set of pages, and I think some of you even participated in this week already. But it turns out the problem wasn't necessarily with the design of the pages, but the actual content. So it's like, okay, I should make sure that our writers see this. I should make sure that the people that are writing blog posts see this feedback. You really want to make sure that, as helpful as all the great stuff that you get out of that, someone else in your organization or your team or department can probably get equally awesome stuff and to help them improve their work and how that ties back into the thing that you're building and working on. You really start to peel back and kind of trace all these little layers and dependencies that you have across different teams as you start digging into some of these results. And this can be, sometimes you can capture all this in a report. Again, brevity is nice. Everyone appreciates a really concise document. Or sometimes a slide deck, a meeting. There's lots of different ways that you can go about communicating these findings and sharing them. And one of the important things to note, though, is that you really want to try to capture the perspective of those users, of the people that were using that. So even if you don't agree with it, like we saw in the Silicon Valley clip, or totally understand it yet, and you're not sure why, just describing, okay, this is what people did, this is what they said, and really trying to convey that perspective, right? Because that's the whole idea. It's trying to get feedback that's not our own to help us improve these things. It's also it's oftentimes really powerful to help kind of sell the results and help push for some changes if you include little video clips, like a little snippet of someone just like gushing over something, or they click the thing and they're like, whoa, that's so cool. Or like an audio recording, or some kind of picture or something, or if you don't do video or audio or don't want to share those kinds of things, you can at least just pull out a really great quote. Those kinds of things that really help to, again, kind of convey that person's experience and perspective is really powerful in pushing these things through your team. All right, any questions?
So with that, we've got, I've got a Google Drive up here with both, it's got the presentation, the slides in it, as well as some examples of actual tests that we've done, some products, so you can see exactly how we've gone and written scenarios and tests. Use them, copy them, paste them, substitute for your own tests. There's a link in there to, if you want to see. A lot of times when we do a test, we'll have to have someone sit down and sign an NDA. We've got just a link to a website that we all use so that we can conduct this anytime, anywhere. It's a page that's open to the public, so if you want to see what we do to cover for that, and it's just a form when someone fills out their name and email address, it sends you a copy, it sends our legal department a copy, and we're all covered to show you something that is kind of like in the future that no one else is seeing. So it's helpful. Just this morning I added a link. There's a document with a link to some books, some blog posts. You don't have to have any really fancy software. We've got some software for doing recording and observation and stuff like that can cost thousands of dollars. I've done user tests using Google Hangouts, and you can set up Google Hangouts to record to a private YouTube channel and then go and download that from YouTube later and keep it. No one ever sees it, so free. I've done testing with people across the country, just like, hey, you got 5 minutes to jump on the Hangout and look at something for me? We'll share the screen. And just this morning I found someone tweeted out a link to a spreadsheet that they had put together with over 200 links of resources for user research that they're doing. So I've added that. It was an amazing gold mine that I found this morning. Most of it I have never even heard of either. So I've added that into there as well. And I've given this talk a couple times previously, and my co-workers and I will continue to give this talk throughout the year, and we'll keep this drive updated as we add more stuff to it, so things might change in there. So yes, first question. So you asked, how do we feel about using prototyping tools for doing testing? Is that yours? So we do that all the time. So I've done some tests of we develop with Sketch and push stuff to Envision and just create hotspots, kind of like a little click through to fake it. That takes a lot less time to produce and test than to actually build code and have the developers building code while they're still maintaining other applications. Perfectly legitimate. We've tested with just even paper prototypes. Here's a couple of wireframes drawn out on some paper and laid them out on a table, and kind of like, okay, if you could imagine this was an interface, where would you click? Yeah, so anything that you can put down in front of somebody, you can test with. So, anyone else? Any other questions? Well, thank you. We'll be here for a few minutes longer afterwards. If you got any questions you want to come up and let us know. And if you have any input on the presentation, please do so on the survey. We'll continue to try and improve it, make it a little bit more entertaining. If you need more cat gifs, so yes. Oh, okay, yeah. I'll add that to the drive there, the list of the videos. Yeah, I've got it bookmarked in my browser that'll come back to. So thanks.
All right, thank you everyone.